And we actually did have we had a mealworm farm at one point when we lived in an apartment. So it was incredible, very like a small 2-bedroom apartment, but we could actually produce like a little protein kit, right? Basically, right? So,
well, you don't have to convince me because I grew up in Africa.
Of course, yeah.
In Botswana, and we ate mopani worms.
Oh, right.
From little kids.
Right.
We were taught. So what are the critical issues around food security and sustainability right now in your view?
I think to think about this question, the first thing to think about is what exactly is a food system? So the food system is made of multiple components. One of the frameworks that we often like to use is from production to processing to distribution to access. And then that's connected with a variety of social, environmental, economic, and political factors. So it's quite complex. Now, when you're looking at the critical issues for food systems, you can kind of look at this through an environmental framing. Often, I like to tell people about the planetary boundaries framework, which was created through the Stockholm Resilience Center. What they identify is 9 critical planetary boundaries, some limits that we need to stay inside to be in a safe operating space. The ones that they say that we've transgressed are climate change, biodiversity loss, land systems change, which that refers to forest to agriculture conversion, and then disruptions to the nutrient cycle. So this is nitrogen, phosphorus. Now, when you think about it, agriculture is a contributor to all 4 of those issues, and it's also highly vulnerable to those issues.
Right.
So often you can kind of think about agriculture in terms of greenhouse gas productions, methane, through fertilizers too, the nitrous oxides, land conversion. It affects biodiversity for the loss of habitat, and certain practices can reduce soil ecosystems or damage soil ecosystems too. The nutrient cycle, the use of fertilizer, nutrient pollutants in the water. But I also don't really like to just label agriculture or frame it as just the villain, because it's also very, very vulnerable.
No, we recently had COP in Egypt, and then there was also the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. Mm-hmm. Were you encouraged by what you heard from both of those forums in terms of people understanding what the challenges are to food systems right now and what needs to be done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that I'm encouraged probably more so by the recent reports that have come out. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's recent Assessment 6 report, they really explicitly identify the linkages between climate change, biodiversity, and human well-being. So this is a linkage that people have known for quite some time, but particularly in their second working group report and the vulnerabilities report, they're showing that these things are intimately connected and we can't separate them. And so that's been very interesting to see and encouraging. And then recently, WWF actually put out their Living Planet Index report, and they did basically the same thing, like really front and center climate change. Even though this is a group that focuses primarily on biodiversity, they really front and center climate change and talked about how biodiversity, climate change, human well-being are linked and inseparable.
Rob, you are a Canada Research Chair, so you're a researcher, but you teach as well. I know you teach courses in environment and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So how do you incorporate this into your teaching? And maybe you could just give me a little sense of how students approach these issues as well.
What's interesting is I don't specifically teach courses on food systems. The courses I teach on climate change, science and impacts. We're starting up a new course in regenerative sustainable development. But for all these courses, for all the sustainability courses and thinking that's required behind it, a lot of it is systems thinking. So examples of food systems come up. And particularly interesting, we often as teachers will give students the opportunity to select a topic or case that they're interested in exploring from a systems perspective, and many students will choose food. So almost invariably, actually, there's at least one food project.
So I wondered if you could just comment as a final question, just a little bit about what you see as the future of food and food systems. Yeah.
If we're looking at what the future of food could look like, different from now, and transitioning towards sustainable futures, then ultimately what we're going to see is diverse production. It will probably be decentralized too. What we're seeing with a lot of the challenges that we talked about before, a lot of that happens because of centralized food systems. But what's important here is to recognize that a food asset doesn't do just one thing. I think a lot of folks will look at a urban garden, a community garden, and think, okay, that's for feeding. Not necessarily. We might not actually produce a lot of food here, or you might not produce a lot of food in a community garden. But it does other things. It can serve as a community garden, could be part of a green space network. It could be part of green infrastructure, reduce surface runoff, so that sort of thing. It could be a great community gathering place. It could be a good education space. But then you might have other forms for production. So things like vertical agriculture, indoor agriculture. Some people might find it controversial, but cellular agriculture, producing animal products without the animals, but using tissue cultures and fermentation techniques instead. The long story short is that resilient food systems means diverse forms of food assets.
Just want to congratulate you on your work, and thank you so much, for being here at Raw Roads and for engaging our students on these hugely important topics. So thanks, Rob. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.